You're about to meet the innovators and influencers who are restoring the Judeo-Christian foundations of our culture right here on The Patrick Coffin Show.
And now, here's your host, Patrick Coffin.
Welcome back to the show. I am indeed Patrick Coffin, joined now by Dr. Anthony Esolen to talk about what on earth happened to American culture. What's the historical root, if you will, if there's one single root of the crisis, and where we can go from here. Dr. Esolen is a professor of English at Providence College in Rhode Island. He's also the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Western Civilization and other books too numerous to enumerate here, about which, however, you can find out more at patrickcoffin.media. His latest book is titled Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture. He joins us now from his sprawling compound somewhere near the campus of Providence College. Dr. Esolen, so glad you can join us.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be here.
Out of the Ashes. Okay, so I want to show the camera the cover of this fine book. Get there. Rebuilding American Culture. Let's start with the title. So out of the ashes means something got burned badly, enough to create ashes. Right. Where do you locate the fuse of what blew up or burned to the ground? How did this culture crisis begin, from which we have to start rebuilding? Is there a date or like a liminal turning point, some Rubicon that was crossed, and we can look back and say that was the beginning of it?
Okay, well, it depends on what aspect of this decline we were talking about. I think there's a variety of dates. So, for instance, if you are asking me about the decline in American education, I think that I'd set the date actually rather early. I'd set it around 1930, about the time when John Dewey, with his crass utilitarianism, basically took over American education, or the instruction of American teachers from the Teachers College of Columbia University. It went forth from that through graduates of Teachers College, but also through their philosophy that spread everywhere to all of the teachers' colleges across the country. American education begins to change pretty drastically then. If you go to 1920, and I have the textbooks to prove it, right? You go to 1920, and education in the United States of America, it is taken for granted that is what it would be in Russia, not Russia, but Germany, Italy, England, France, and so forth. It's basically what we now call a classical education. Thorough grounding in arts and letters, in grammar, which is a systematic study of how your language works, and not just a grab bag of arbitrary rules that the teachers themselves don't understand.
And which I never received. Not one class in
most people have never received, right. So most people have no real coherent understanding of language as such, including their own mother tongue. Right. Dewey had scorn for that kind of education, which he himself had received, but he rejected it for everybody else. And from about 1930 on, you see the textbooks in use in American schools. They almost fall off a cliff. That's why, as early as the 1950s, we have somebody writing, I can't remember his name offhand, writing Why Johnny Can't Read. Okay. Nobody was writing Why Johnny Can't Read in 1925. They were writing it in 1955 because of because of the effects of the ditching of phonics and the dumbed down textbooks. Textbooks artificially limited to very simple words, and they were utterly boring. They're totally different from the previous textbooks. And by 1955, there was a crisis. Okay, and we never really recovered from that. And that kind of thinking that animated Dewey as regards the study of language, learning how to read, that is replicated in the study of just about every other subject going out there. So we end up with radical changes in how students were taught how to do arithmetic, with predictable results. So it's predictable. If you were grounded in the old classical education, you'd have been able to predict it. But so now we have a couple of generations of people who can't do a long division problem, right? It's the same sort of thing has happened in different ways with different collapses in the teaching of history, the teaching of literature, and so forth. It now is just a complete bombed out city. the public schools as a whole, not talking about maybe this particular public school or that particular one, but as a whole, the entire system is beyond reform. You simply do not have enough people who have had a real education, who would be able to impart anything really powerful, really vital, alive to young people now. There are too few. Isn't
he the guy who defeated Truman, though?
I don't even know if they were related.
That silly Dewey, the decimal system he came up with.
It's not the Dewey decimal system guy either, yeah.
And it's not one of the ducks, Huey, Dewey, or what's the other duck?
Huey, Dewey, and Louie. That Dewey might have been the most intelligent of all the
closest. Maybe Rudolph Flesch, Roy Johnny Can't Read?
Rudolph Flesch, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. Would you call this slow, soft government takeover of public education? Is that overplaying the card or understating?
No, it's not understating it at all. In 1920, I believe. Okay, per 1,000 students. Okay, obviously our population has changed, so the absolute numbers are different. But per 1,000 students, there were 21 times as many school boards, school districts as there are now. Okay. So you have 21 times as many people, at the very least, perhaps even more, intimately involved in the running of a local school as you have now, per 1,000 students. They had not yet had the consolidation of very small, very local school boards into big school districts. That was a terrible mistake. Along with that came the inhuman mistake of building very large institutions after a kind of an industrial model, right? So you build factory-like institutions for the teaching of 1,000 young people at once, 1,000 little kids at once. We forget what little kids even are. We would not do that to dogs, but we do it to little kids.
So outcome-based, and that's it. Like child as factory product.
Yeah, child is factory product, and any notion that this system in any large numbers is going to produce people who are really thoroughly grounded in the literary and artistic and philosophical, theological, historical heritage of the West, be oriented towards what is true and good and beautiful. I mean, that may happen, by the way. It may happen accidentally here and there. You might end up with a teacher who really doesn't belong in the public schools. But as a system, it is utterly incapable of imparting that. It's got to be scrapped. It cannot be reformed. We're not talking about a limb with gangrene here. The whole body is filled with gangrene. This is a corpse, and we need to build from the ground up all over again.
It's a multi-headed Medusa monster. You've come at it from so many different angles in the book, Out of the Ashes. I wanted to linger a little bit on the restoration, not of public institutions of education, but on the sheer act of truth-telling. I believe it was Pope Emeritus Benedict who said the truth is now something like an act of revolution, that or similar words, that just calling things by their right name has become controversial. So, as you point out, we've agreed to publicly lie about things like, well, you can start the list with someone who has lopped off a body part or added one on and had a cocktail of hormones. And so a male is called a female, and we're all supposed to use the feminine pronoun. One of the people I've interviewed is Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's now fighting the pronoun wars up at the University of Toronto. And this is a good example of what happens when the totalitarian impulse gains the support of law. Talk a little bit about the fear that people have of speaking plainly and not wanting to go along with the web of lies that have kind of settled as the default way that we talk about things nowadays.
That too is a many-headed hydra. One aspect of it is this: in the old literature, right? I'm thinking of English literature going back to the Renaissance. One of the features of a man, this is a quality of manliness, right? less so a quality of womanliness, for a reason I'll describe in a moment. But quality of manliness is to speak frankly, plainly, to be a so-called plain dealer. You see something that is true, you say what you see. And there was a kind of tacit agreement among men that a person who speaks what he sees as the truth is not to be greeted with any kind of emotional hysteria, any kind of fit. Okay,
or being wounded personally or
right.
emotionally.
The speaking of a truth is not to be taken personally. Okay, think of it as a kind of application of the job of an umpire to human dealings generally, right? And this is considered a feature of manliness. Now the woman may have a different role to play in social settings. That is, it's the woman's need or the woman's longing is to bring it about so that people can deal with one another comfortably, without hard feelings, gently, in a friendly, social way. But men by themselves have had, as I say, tacit agreements or even frank institutions for setting aside the social niceties so that you could baldly, plainly, frankly, and in a manly way speak the truth and have it be dealt with by your audience. So that if they disagreed with you, they could not say, "How dare you say that?" They had to say, "I believe you are wrong, and this is why."
Right.
Okay? That has gone by the boards. There are a couple of reasons, I guess. One is that maybe about 50 or so years ago, we had it finally firmly embedded in our educational institutions that there really was no such thing as truth outside of the science departments. And that is deadly. Okay, if you don't believe that you can speak about a true interpretation of a play by Shakespeare, we can never reduce a play of Shakespeare to a single interpretation, but there are interpretations that reach more of the truth than others. If you can't talk in those terms, what's left? Well, what's left is to read Shakespeare for political utility, for what you can do to him or with him as a political instrument. In other words, you use it for propaganda, for political propaganda. Sometimes you use Shakespeare for political propaganda and you make him be a proponent of what you like. Sometimes you use him as a whipping boy. It's almost just as bad to do as one as the other, right? So the funny thing, I've seen it in the social sciences and in the humanities generally, a retreat from any overmastering mandate to pursue the truth. Instead, this, dare I say, effeminate, it's a misplaced and disease. It's not truly feminine. It's what you get through a caricature of the feminine and the elimination of the truly masculine.
Would that be emasculated? Would that be a synonym?
Yeah, it's emasculated with a kind of curdled femininity taking its place, not a true femininity. And what I'm
going to write that down. Curdled femininity.
Curdled femininity. Yeah. It's so that you have people who read literature in order to comfort the feelings of supposedly marginalized. I hate the word marginalized groups. Turned into margarine, or to make the people whom you hate feel uncomfortable. It then becomes embroiled in identity politics. It's a mess. I mean, who would bother to read Shakespeare or Milton or Pope or Samuel Johnson on any of those terms? Well, increasingly fewer and fewer people bother to do it, and our English literature programs across the country have often abandoned the study of those authors, so that you only study the authors that you can do that sort of thing to.
If you dropped any of those names in the first week to freshmen where you teach, would
Right.
you get a lot of blank stares?
Yes.
Even among, and I mean the creme de la creme English majors who want
Right.
to
I
dive
do
deep. Yeah.
Perhaps not with English majors, or perhaps also with them. So I actually did this just the other day. My honors students, I'm meeting them for the first time in our Western Civilization program, and we're reading Beowulf, and I want to know what kind of experience they have had in high school reading poetry. Now, poetry is the bulk of what we mean by literature until about 1800, when the novel begins its rapid flourishing. Before 1800, almost every culture that you go to, the bulk of literature is going to be in poetic form. So not to have any experience with poetry is to be cut off from an enormous fund of human culture, everywhere in the world, too.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm going to give you some names of English poets, and I just want you to tell me whether you recognize the names. So I already told them these are English poets. I didn't say, well, these are people you might know. They might be inventors or politicians. These are poets.
Quick pause.
Say,
did you ask them to mentally assent, or did you ask for a show of hands?
I asked for a show of hands.
Okay.
Alfred Tennyson, 2 people out of 16. John Milton, 3 or 4 people out of 16. Chaucer, I got maybe about 6 or 7 people out of 16. John Keats, 4 or 5 people out of 16. And I said to them, not to recognize the name of Alfred Tennyson, but to be speaking English as your mother tongue is rather like growing up in Italy and not recognizing the name of Leonardo da Vinci. And I think they were kind of stunned by that. I said, I'm not blaming you guys. I know it's not your fault. It's the fault of the schools that have brought you up, but I'm telling you, this is the case. There's no reforming that. I mean, you can't go to these teachers who have been teaching porno twaddle like Angels in America or The Handmaid's Tale or the Laramie Project or some such stuff, all through their teaching of high school for the last 25 years, and then say, hey, you really ought to supplement this with Paradise Lost. That's gone. I mean, they do not have the capacity to teach Paradise Lost. They'd be as lost as the students.
Let me ask you something. Yeah, it's related, because we're talking about how men speak with one another and how women speak with one another, and how complicated that gets when the sexes try to reach across the aisle. It's
Right.
kind of a miracle that anybody gets or stays married, right? And people say, young people, I'm not sure if I'm compatible. And I like to ask, are you a boy? Yeah. Is she a girl? Yeah. Well, you're not compatible.
Yeah. Well, that's. I used to put it this way, though, because some of my friends from Princeton would say, well, you have to live with each other first to see whether you are sexually compatible.
Of course. Yeah.
And I would say, what? You got one of those? Yeah. She got one of those? Yeah. You're sexually compatible.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust. Distilled, or apart from all the bromides of the last 30 to 50 years and getting away from the confusions about what a man is and what a woman is, how would you distill masculinity versus femininity? Now, I know there are exceptions. I know there are some men that have qualities that we identify as feminine. But you've cranked through some examples that I find really fascinating in the chapter on restoring manhood. I'll give you mine for masculinity. To me, the essence of masculinity is initiation, and femininity is reception. Now, I don't mean passivity, and by initiation, I don't mean authoritarianism. Right. That to me kind of gets at it. What are some of yours? Because if we get that wrong, then maybe the sexes really aren't sexes; they're genders, and the whole discussion becomes this bendy, pliable thing that has no basis in anthropology.
No basis in anthropology at all. I challenge people with this, and I've never heard an answer to this. Okay, I say, really, the sexes are all socially constructed. Really, you have, if you go to the oral poetry or the written poetry or stories of any culture that we have information on, and that's about 1,500 different cultures, at any age, okay, in any part of the world, in any geographical climate, at any stage of technological development, you will immediately recognize the men as men and the women as women. They are familiar to you. You say Helen of Troy, and they think, yeah, I actually know someone like that. I know a woman like that. We've met Helen of Troy. We've met Hector. We've met Achilles. We've met Anna Karenina, right? I mean, these are all characters familiar to us because men are familiar to us as men and women as women. All you have to do to show how absurd it is to believe otherwise is to take a social situation of any modest complexity. Okay, I call this doing the mental sex change operation. You reverse the sexes in a particular social situation. It doesn't even have to be a situation that involves both sexes. It can involve only members of one sex or members of the other. Pretend that everybody is the other sex and see how many nanoseconds it takes before the whole situation becomes laughable. Because that's not how in a million years those people would act or what they would say. I see it all the time. It's one of those things that you can't notice, just like you don't notice the air you breathe. It's everywhere.
Yeah, fish don't discuss the quality of the water.
So one thing I say about masculinity often, there are many things to say, but one thing that I think is lost in many of the discussions, and I got this from a friend of mine who is all over this issue in Minnesota. He says he calls it the missing icon. It's the icon of the brotherhood. The ultimate brotherhood, of course, is Christ with his apostles. Now think, men form strange kinds of brotherhoods. And these brotherhoods in the history of the human race have been tremendously dynamic. We needn't think only of marauding gangs of destructive warriors, okay, like the Vikings showing up in a ship at your port city and threatening to burn it down.
Or a street gang.
Unless you pay them off. Or a street gang, though. If we think about the street gangs, what we see there is something perfectly natural that has gone wrong, right? Because what there should be are brotherhoods, not gangs. Okay. Yeah. So what were brotherhoods in the old days? Well, I don't know. Take, for instance, the Renaissance Guild and Studio, where you had a master painter or two, often cousins or brothers, with their subordinates who would usually be grown men of somewhat lesser talent than they had, and maybe 15 or 20 boys, even very young boys, 6, 7, 8 years old, learning the trade, right? For room and board, or at least for something, for some kind of, there was some kind of exchange. They weren't paid any money. They learned a lot by doing in the midst of this brotherhood that spanned the ages too, right? Because there were grown men and there were children. Now, feminists would look at that and say, oh my gosh, how horrible this thing is. They didn't admit women. I stand back from it because I'm a realist. And I look at it and I say, hey, let's notice something here. These Renaissance Guilds studios, and we're talking about an institution that actually began in the high Middle Ages and extended through to the end of the Renaissance. Those brotherhoods produced most of the greatest art that the world has ever seen. We're talking about a system that produced Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Raphael and Botticelli and on and on and on and on. Not just in Italy, but in Czechoslovakia and Russia and Scandinavia, every place, right? How could you have had an artistic flourishing that was any better than what we already did have? We have nothing like that now. We don't have 1/100th of what they had then in terms of really great artistic production. The 1,000th best painter in Italy in the year 1500 probably cleaned the clock of any painter in America right now. Okay, so I think, right, what was central to this? And nobody wants to say, but it seems to me very obvious. what was central to it was the male brotherhood. The male brotherhood finds hierarchical ways of getting things done. There's a kind of authority chain, but also a kind of equality among everybody. Think about the authority chain and the equality of a football team, right? Yeah.
There's something quasi-militia about it. There's a chain of command.
Yes.
There's subordinates.
Yes.
There are leaders, and there are tribesmen and so on.
And your personal feelings in these situations. There's a tacit understanding, again, that your personal feelings are not supposed to get in the way of the work, right? Mm-hmm. There is work to be done. If you got personal feelings, you deal with it out there. Like the Army back in the day, if two guys were in a scuffle, what the Army would do typically would be to put them in a boxing ring with boxing gloves and have them punch each other's lights out.
Yeah.
What they found then was that by sort of bracketing the strife between these two people, giving it an official place to play itself out, and allowing them to have it out physically, right? They found that it would diffuse the situation, often would produce very close friendships.
That's the thing that people don't understand. The bond that happens after one is vanquished, when the pecking order is finally, fulfilled. It's almost like the physical, pugilistic equivalent of the warfare of the way men speak. You were talking about the way men talk,
Right.
Like Tom Hanks in the film, Madonna's in it, Rosie O'Donnell's in it. No, there's no crying in baseball.
Yeah, I don't watch any films made after 1970, but it's in all the literature of the world, right? So it's in the ancient Babylonian Gilgamesh epic. It's central there. We see it in How Green Was My Valley. That's in Wales. It's there in Robert Louis Stevenson's novel Captain's Courageous. The skipper of the schooner has to deck the snot-nosed young teenage boy Harvey. And from this pummeling comes not just obedience. It's not craven obedience. It really marks the beginning of Harvey's developing manhood. That
pummeling happens in every Frank Capra film.
Yeah. Oh, it's in The Quiet Man, too, in John Ford.
Yeah, that's right.
The Quiet Man, right?
Yeah.
Men understand this, too. If I ask a room full of boys and men, how many of you have had at least one friendship whose inception was a physical fight?
Yeah.
Okay. I get a whole lot of people raising their hands, and they laugh about it.
Yeah.
Women don't do that.
You maintain in the book, in the chapter Restoring Manhood, that I'll just quote now, but the boy must be made into a man. There has to be a crossing of a Rubicon. There's like a crisis that he has to surmount. He has to enter the world of men in a way that maybe goes to what I believe that men in so many ways are the weaker sex. Women seem to transition from girlhood to womanhood with greater ease. There seems to be a lesson that men have to learn on the inside experientially before they can go from boy to man. And nowadays, those institutions are they've gone or fading.
They're gone.
Local teams, bowling leagues, hunting groups, men smoking and discussing, parlor groups for men. Very hard to find one without it being deconstructed and called sexist.
They are absolutely necessary too. The rebuilding of the culture is not going to happen. Is not going to happen without the revival of the reconstitution of these brotherhoods. As I say, it's one of the brotherhood is one of the three fundamental cultural bonds of love that any culture is built upon: mother and child, husband wife, and brother. Okay, and I am not talking about sibling here. I really am specifically talking about brother. So you have woman to child, then man to woman, and brother to brother. I don't mean that women, when they are in their groups, don't do things, but the masculine brotherhood, as I said, is extremely dynamic. Who the heck do people think built the Brooklyn Bridge? Without those brotherhoods, those things don't get done. And if you can turn boys into men, real men, not thugs, okay, and not these macho narcissists that you see on the cover of Men's Health magazine, but real men, I mean, there's no telling what they can do. We got a lot of problems. Those problems are not going to be fixed by, holding a quilting bee, as wonderful as a quilting bee may be, Nobody is going to clean up the streets of Chicago by baking cakes with pink icing.
Yeah.
If men don't come together to do that, it is not going to get done.
And how this has influenced and infected the church in the way catechesis and evangelization is done, in the way Catholic preaching and teaching is affected.
Absolutely.
It's largely, again, I don't want to say feminine, because that's not what it is. It's unmasculine in so many different ways.
Right.
And I think a lot of this, correct me if I'm wrong, has to do with a domesticated version of who Jesus Christ is. Jesus is no longer the man's man, the guy who attracted fishermen and rough-hewn carpenter types. He's now more like Barney or Mr. Rogers.
Purple Jesus.
Yeah. And so the goal of being a Christian, particularly for men, is just to be nice. To be nice and to be, well, obviously you have to be kind to be a Christian, but the sense of there's a war out there and we have to be on the front lines, and it's a contact sport. And it's go big or stay home. How has all this affected, and I'm not just talking or picking on Catholicism either, how has this affected the churches?
Oh my gosh. So many ways. Let me just take one tack here. There are many things we could be talking about in this regard. So you will notice wherever you go in the world, right? You can go to an isolated Indian tribe in the Amazon jungle, or you can go to Australia among the Aborigines, you can go the Eskimos, and go anywhere. You will see boys, if they are behaving in a natural way, you will see boys engaging in rough play. And there's actually perfectly reasonable, perfectly understandable physical, biological cause of this. The rough play feels good to them because the bumping around, the getting bruised and beaten up builds bones.
100%. Take a cross-check on the hockey. I grew up playing hockey for 10 years. I could skate before I could walk. The smash mouth, getting pounded to the ground on Salem football field. There's a joy in it. Yeah, it hurts like hell. But
it's not. And this is something that that most women really find very, very difficult to understand, because the strategy with nature as regards women is to be protective, right? The strategy as regards males, because you don't need as many for the next generation. I'm speaking only in biological.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Is to be reckless. The upside is a lot greater. The downside, if you lose a few, is basically non-existent. So they play rough and they like it. It's somehow fun to be smashed against the plexiglass, not just to smash somebody else.
Yeah,
it feels right. Okay, now that sort of thing in the physical realm has its analogs in intellectual realm also. This is why when men are alone, they can beat each other up rhetorically and not bring hard feelings away from it. They can beat each other up intellectually and be more friendly to each other than before. This is common, all right? If I can actually say to a man in the company of men, "Come on!" I mean, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say, right? I cannot say that to a man in mixed company. It's a completely different dynamic there. And I certainly am never going to say it to a woman. If I say it to a woman, that's it.
Yeah.
There's no more relationship there. And a woman is not going to say that to a woman ever. We're just different. God made us differently. What's the big deal about that? It's fun.
Vive la différence.
Yeah.
That was French, by the way.
Yeah. It's Italian. Viva la differenza. Yeah.
No Welsh, please. We're
That was Italian.
I want to turn to your treatment of work, and you don't address this explicitly, but I think I believe it was Studs Terkel has a book called maybe Work or Working, how attitudes toward working.
Yeah.
When men worked with their fathers, when there was horse dressing guilds and pre-industrial revolution, pre-mass factory means of production, and it was more agrarian, obviously. There was a sense in which work was tied directly to your life, whether it was the farm or a trade that had to do with working the land, or tools where father could hand a skill onto his son.
And women, they're working with their daughters.
Right.
And you say
yes.
The girls then enjoyed something like what the boys were enjoying. It took different forms, but it was something that grounded you in the generations, because you knew that the kind of thing that you were doing was what your father did, what your grandfather did, and their fathers before them. And what you would then go on to teach your own sons to do, and the women would teach their daughters to do.
Yeah.
And it's really fulfilling. I mean, you don't have this momentary blip of a life. You really are dwelling in time, rather than just flitting along on the river, floating down the river like a dead thing.
Where I was going with this is the shift from work to labor. Work meaning things that have to be done and the dignity that's attached to it, versus sweat of my brow. Oh, I've got a deadline. I've got to get through this because I'm chasing one thing, and that's my paycheck, and that's all.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between work and labor, isn't there?
There's a big difference. It might be healthy for our young people, all of them, to regularly do difficult physical work with the parent of the same sex. So, I mean, it's good for us all, I think. I find myself sometimes never happier or never more at peace than when I am doing physical labor on a roof, painting the insides and outsides of a house, digging, even going out hunting for wild berries. I'm at peace. I don't think that's going to change with the human race. That is our inheritance from many, many thousands of years. That is what we're like. And if we deny that side of us, we become like cripples. It's like having an intellectual, emotional, spiritual scurvy. Your bones are thin and breakable, or rickets, maybe. It's rickets I'm thinking of. You're thin and pallid and easily broken. I think if we get the kids outdoors doing things with their hands and legs and shoulders and backs, that it won't be just their hands, legs, shoulders, and backs that we'll be developing. And good for everybody.
I'm not sure if this is a prior conversation or something in the book, but you noted photographs, say pre-Depression era, and you notice that the young men, pre-teens, they don't look like the mall rats we have today. They don't. There is actually a new medical thing. I think it's called screen neck or something. There's it's a thing among doctors, neck problems, because you're staring at the glowing screen all day long. You don't have that uprightness, barn-raising, outdoorsy kind of physique.
Yeah, I notice it. I think it was in our conversation before. I notice it particularly in pictures of boys, but you also notice it in the girls. And the boys don't have to be 15, 16 years old. You will notice it in boys aged 5, 6. They've got that man body developing. Very rarely will you see a really pudgy kid, a picture of a pudgy kid before about 1960. If it's taken in the summer, those bodies look tanned, and they have neck muscles and arm muscles, leg muscles. If they're wearing a low-cut shirt or a T-shirt, or if they're wearing overalls or they're bare-chested, you get this like 9 or 10-year-old kid, and he's got the line down the chest. He's got that developing body of a man, and it can only be because he's been outside playing hard, and frankly, doing a lot of hard work too.
Yeah.
All the time. He's outside all the time. And what he's got is a normal human body for a boy. And the girls have normal human bodies for girls. What we have now is not normal at all.
Yeah, girls now go from 6 to 16 to 26 in about 45 minutes. When I was in high school, a 16-year-old girl looked 16. She was a teenager. Now I have daughters myself. Out in the street, I can't gauge age at all. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
Let me close with a question. I think it goes to the heart of the crisis that your book addresses, Out of the Ashes, and that is, how has the development and the spread of the contraceptive mentality changed everything about the way men see women and vice versa, and how has it led to the hookup culture and the rise of divorce and the normalization of pornography? The infiltration of the pill after it was approved in 1960 seems to be more profound to me than nuclear war. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. Look, we exploded a couple of nuclear bombs over Japan. Those are the only ones we've ever used. The pill changed everything. Unfortunately, we didn't have the spiritual resources to deal with it at the time. But you go back to the arguments made by the state of Connecticut, half-heartedly, okay? But they knew that their duty was to defend the law on the books in Connecticut in the Supreme Court case Griswold versus Connecticut.
So 1965, yeah. Right?
Right. One of the lead ups to the infamous Roe versus Wade decision. The state of Connecticut argued from the point of view of the common good, that is, if you allow this, the common good will be undermined because it will have the effect of undermining marriage itself, right? Now, yeah. I think that many very powerful common good arguments could have been made then, more than the ones that were made. And now, after 50 or so years of experience with it, my gosh, common good arguments can be made all over the place. So suppose you don't have the pill, okay? Suppose you don't have the pill, you don't have the IUD. What do? Well, all at once, you are forced, whether you like it or not, you are forced to acknowledge that the thing that brings children in the world actually does bring children into the world. And maybe if you are not ready to bring a child into the world, you shouldn't be doing that there.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have to bring you back to reality.
Yeah, so broken condoms and pills that didn't work don't cause pregnancy. Sexual intercourse does. Right.
The church said, people in the church said, listen, if you do this, make no mistake, we're making a prediction. You are not going to have fewer unwed mothers. You are going to have many more, because the great natural barrier, the guardrail against fornication, you will have removed.
Sure.
So you have millions more people in your own country engaging in fornication. And I don't care, and increase in the number of times they engage in it too. So it doesn't matter how reliable you think your method of birth control is, you're going to have more unwed mothers. You're going to change the culture entirely, change the terms. And this is going to be dreadful for children, and it's going to undermine marriage. Well, what the heck has happened, right? And what do we have now? What's the odds that a 30-year-old man in the United States of America is married? 1 out of 4? That's insane. That's crazy. There's no biological reason for it. There's no common good reason for it. It's deleterious all the way across the board. And what makes it possible? Because he doesn't need to get married. He has other outlets. He can fornicate and he can use porn.
Yeah, or that phrase, why buy the cow when you're getting the milk for free?
Yeah.
The Griswold versus Connecticut decision, people forget that the Griswold part is Estelle Griswold, a Planned Parenthood local leader. Yeah. So another tentacle of the culture of death. Right. I've got 10 hours more of questions, but you have a life and a job and a family. Yeah. Maybe we can put an ellipses or a semicolon there and come back and
There's so much to
talk
talk
about the
about.
next thing. And the book's magnificent, Dr. Esolen. Thanks so much for writing it.
We could talk about church. We could talk about liturgy. We could talk about music. We could talk about, really, everywhere you look, there is rubble.
Well, rubble is easier to clear than a brick wall. So maybe the more rubble, paradoxically, it'll get closer to ashes, and we can do something Phoenix-like with it, with God's grace. Deal?
Right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Patrick.
The book's called Out of the Ashes, Rebuilding American Culture, published by Regnery. Its author has been our guest on this edition of the show, Dr. Anthony Esolen of Providence College. You can find out more about the book and other sundry topics in the show notes at patrickcoffin.media. But get the book. It's great. Just don't waste time. Get the book. You'll love it. In fact, you'll thank me, so you're welcome. This is Patrick Coffin. Be a saint. What else is there?